The last time my mother asked me to take something back, she was standing beside her Christmas tree with a cream-colored envelope shaking between her fingers. She had read the first page twice. Then she looked at me as if I had done something unforgivable. "You didn't," she whispered. "Please tell me you didn't." Brittany stopped talking across the room. My father lowered his coffee. Even Ava, sitting beside me on the couch, went still. I remember thinking how strange it was that my mother looked more frightened by a few pieces of paper than she had 3 months earlier, when my sister looked my 17-year-old daughter in the face and told her she was not real family. Before I tell you how we ended up around that Christmas tree, I hope you're doing well wherever you're listening from. Stay with me, because what happened after my sister's wedding changed far more than one family gathering. And if stories about family, betrayal, and finally drawing the right line resonate with you, subscribe to the channel and stay with me through the end. 3 months earlier, I still believed I understood my family. I knew my mother, Patricia, could be controlling. I knew my younger sister, Brittany, cared too much about appearances. I also knew they occasionally used phrases about biological grandchildren or family blood that made me correct them immediately. What I had not understood was that correcting someone's language is not the same thing as changing what they believe. Every time I pushed back, they learned to stop saying certain things in front of me. I mistook that for progress. Brittany's wedding was at a restored estate outside Columbus, less than 40 minutes from my house. Ava and I had been invited months earlier. The invitation listed both our names. We had both responded through the wedding website, and Ava had even chosen the pasta dinner instead of the chicken. A week before the wedding, Brittany had texted me about photographs and written, "Make sure Ava stays nearby after the ceremony. I want all the women in the family together before dinner." I remember showing Ava that message because she had been unusually hesitant about attending. "Are you sure she actually wants me there?" she asked while fastening an earring in my bathroom mirror that morning. I looked at her reflection. Ava had been my daughter legally since she was 13 and part of my life since she was 11. By then I had learned that when she asked a question like that, she usually had a reason. Still, I pointed to the invitation lying on my dresser. "Your name is right there. You chose your dinner. Brittany literally asked you to be in the family photos. If anything feels weird, you tell me and we leave. No debate." That had always been my approach. I did not ask Ava to tolerate cruelty because someone shared my last name. I had corrected my mother before. I had taken Ava home early from gatherings before. I had refused to let relatives make her perform gratitude for being adopted. I considered myself good at boundaries. Looking back, that confidence was part of what kept me from seeing the larger problem. The first sign came at the reception building entrance, where a young coordinator stood behind a table with printed guest cards. She found my name quickly. Then she searched for Ava's and frowned. She checked another page, then the tablet beside her. "I'm sorry," she said. "I only have Megan Carter. There should be 2 of us." She checked again. "Was there a late RSVP change?" "No." Ava shifted beside me. I could feel her preparing to make herself smaller, which was a habit I hated because I knew exactly where she had learned it. I took out my phone and pulled up the confirmation email. Here. Megan Carter and Ava Carter. 2 guests. 2 meal selections. The coordinator looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I believe you. But the final list from the bride's side has only your name. I can get Brittany or the wedding planner. Please get Brittany." Before she could move, my mother appeared from inside. Patricia was wearing a pale blue dress and the expression she always used when she wanted everyone around her to behave properly. "What's taking so long?" she asked. "Ava's been removed from the guest list." My mother did not look surprised. That was the moment something in me changed. Not completely. Not yet. But enough that I stopped treating the situation like an administrative mistake. "Did you know about this?" Patricia glanced toward the ballroom doors. "This isn't the place." That wasn't my question. "Megan, please. Brittany is about to get married." Ava was staring at the floor. I said, "Get Brittany." My mother lowered her voice. "Do not make a scene." "I haven't made one." Brittany appeared less than a minute later in her wedding dress, followed by one of her bridesmaids. She looked irritated, not confused. "What happened?" I asked. She crossed her arms. Nothing happened. I adjusted the final list. You removed Ava? I had to make some choices. 2 days before the wedding without telling me? Brittany looked at Ava, then back at me. I wanted today to be intimate. She was already invited. I know. She has a meal. She has a seat confirmation. You asked her to be in family pictures. Brittany exhaled as though I were deliberately missing something obvious. Megan, this wedding is for real family. Everything around me seemed to go quieter. I said, she is my daughter. Brittany looked directly at Ava. You're not blood. Ava did not cry. That would have been easier for me to watch. Her entire face simply emptied. She stopped blinking for a second and stood so still that I could see the pulse beating near her throat. I looked at my mother. Patricia had heard every word. There was a moment when she could have stopped it. She could have told Brittany she had gone too far. She could have told Ava she belonged. She could have done almost anything. Instead, she said to me, "Not here, don't make this bigger." That hurt more than Brittany's sentence. I did not argue. I did not demand a chair. I did not explain adoption law or remind Brittany how many Christmases Ava had spent at our parents' house. My daughter had just been told she was not family. The last thing she needed was to stand in the entrance while I negotiated the value of her relationship to people who already knew exactly who she was. I reached for her hand. We're leaving. Brittany stared at me. Are you serious? Yes. You're going to ruin my wedding over this? I looked at her then, really looked at her, and realized she had expected me to stay. She had removed Ava without warning because she believed I would choose embarrassment over confrontation. She thought once I was dressed, standing at the venue, surrounded by relatives, I would tell Ava we would discuss it later. No, I said. I'm making sure you don't get another chance to ruin something for her. Then I walked away. In the car, Ava kept her face turned toward the passenger window until we were halfway home. Her hand was still in mine whenever traffic stopped. Finally, she asked, "Did Grandma know?" I could have protected my mother. For years, that was what our family did. We translated Patricia into a softer language. We turned deliberate choices into misunderstandings and cruel sentences into generational differences. But Ava had been lied to enough that afternoon. I think she did, I said. Ava nodded once and looked back outside. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, then again. Then 3 times in quick succession. I waited until we reached a red light before looking. My mother had written, "Come back before people notice." Brittany's message came less than a minute later. "You walked out of my wedding. At least own your part." I read it twice, then turned off notifications and put the phone face down. At the time, I thought leaving was the end of the decision. I thought I had drawn the line, protected my daughter, and all that remained was deciding how much distance I wanted from my family. I had no idea Brittany had already put my name on paperwork that would make silence impossible. 2 weeks later, an email from Harbor Family Services appeared in my inbox. The subject line identified it as a supplementary family support reference for Brittany and Nathan Hale. I almost deleted it because I assumed it was spam. Then I opened the message and remembered a conversation Brittany and I had months earlier, when she had casually asked whether I would ever be willing to speak about my experience with adoption if she and Nathan decided to pursue it themselves. I had told her yes. Now, an adoption agency wanted me to answer questions about how Brittany viewed adopted children, non-biological family relationships, and the support an adopted child could expect from her extended family. I sat at my kitchen table reading the questions while Ava did homework in the next room. For the first time since the wedding, I understood exactly why Brittany had been so certain I would keep quiet. The morning after the wedding, Ava came downstairs later than usual and poured cereal without turning on any music. That was how I knew she was still carrying it. Normally, she filled quiet spaces without thinking. A playlist while she made breakfast. A video playing beside her homework. Some story about school that began in the middle because she assumed I already knew the first half. That morning, she sat across from me with both hands around her bowl and stared at the table. "I don't want to talk to Grandma for a while," she said. "Okay." She looked up, almost suspiciously. "That's it?" "That's it. You don't owe anyone access to you because they're related to me." She nodded, but the tension did not leave her face. After a moment, she asked, Was I ever actually family
dinner.
to them?
I had
And
passed
every
Walgreens
time he
3
offered to
times
help,
that month
I had
already
answered
Rachel,
hard
on
questions
his
3
younger
different
sister,
attempts to reach
would
my
deflect with
grandmother.
phrases like,
Every
"Don't
time the
worry,
door had
Mom's
closed,
got it."
I
Why
realized
settle
Or, "We're
then
trying to
that my
keep it
parents
small."
had not
He'd
panicked
chalked it
by
up to
diagnosing
wedding
it.
stress.
They
He
had
told
planned
himself
for it.
not to
But I
take
They
it
had a script
personally,
ready before
but
Granny
now,
moved in.
seeing it in
They
writing
told the
final,
hospice staff their version of
unapologetic,
me long
something
before the
inside
first
him
opioid
shifted.
was prescribed.
Ethan didn't respond.
I drove
He
home
didn't
that
ask
night
why.
and cried in the
He
bathtub
didn't
with the
demand an
water running so the
explanation.
neighbors wouldn't
Instead,
hear.
he stood up,
I said, I'm starting to realize I may have been wrong about what you were to them. She absorbed that quietly. I hated the answer, but I hated false reassurance more. By noon, the family version of the wedding had already begun circulating. My Aunt Denise texted first. I heard things got tense over the guest list. Hope you and Brittany can work it out. I read it twice. Guest list, not blood. Not Ava being deliberately removed, just guest list. I asked what she had been told. Only that there was confusion about who was included in the final count and you left before the ceremony. That was the first time I understood Brittany was not simply angry that I had walked out. She was rewriting why I had walked out. Another cousin messaged that evening asking whether Ava had shown up unexpectedly. Someone else said Brittany had been under enormous pressure because the venue had strict capacity limits. I did not answer every message. I took screenshots and put my phone down. The old version of me would have tried to correct everyone immediately. I would have written a calm paragraph explaining the RSVP, the meal selection, the fact that Brittany had personally invited Ava into family photos. I would have believed that if I presented enough facts clearly enough, reasonable people would understand. Instead, I asked myself what explaining it to 10 relatives would actually accomplish. Nothing for Ava. So I sent Denise one sentence. Ava was formally invited, then deliberately removed from the final guest list without being told. Then I stopped. My mother called that afternoon. I nearly let it go to voicemail, but I answered because there was one thing I still wanted to know. Megan, this has gotten completely out of hand. No, it's gotten outside the wedding venue. She sighed. You know what I mean. I know what Brittany is telling people. She is trying to protect what should have been a happy day. So she's lying. She's embarrassed. That isn't an answer. My mother lowered her voice.
I
in
have
the
been
way
an
she always
ICU
did when
nurse
she
for
wanted
8
to make
years.
anger sound
I know
immature.
exactly what
It was
1.5
one
milligrams per
sentence.
hour of
I
morphine
stared out my
does
kitchen
to an
window.
82-year-old
Ava
woman
was
in
upstairs,
post-op
and
day
I was
2.
glad she could not hear this.
I looked at the
One
IV
sentence
pump.
told my daughter
I looked at
exactly where she
Brenda.
ranked in this family.
Brenda
Ava
looked at the
knows we love
IV
her.
pump.
She
I
knows
said
Brittany threw
quietly,
her out of a
the
wedding
way
she
you
was
talk in a
invited
room
to
with a
because she
sleeping
wasn't
patient.
blood.
Brenda,
She also knows
she's on
I
a
stood there
1.5
and
milligram
said
morphine
nothing.
drip.
That is not
You
fair.
can't notarize this.
It happened.
You know you
Brittany
can't.
had a right to control
Right
her guest
away.
list.
My father
Ethan
in the
just
charcoal
sat there
suit
for a
on the
while,
steps first
phone
Baptist
face
Street.
down on the table,
The purple
letting the
heart
silence in his
hell.
apartment stretch
bright
as far as it
Sunday
needed
sun.
to. The stillness
outside
wasn't
venue.
uncomfortable. He was
Mama
used
would
to
be
it.
so
He had
proud.
lived most of his life
She
in
let
that
it sit on
same
the
quiet
screen for
space
10
emotionally. At
She
least
did not
even
say
when the rooms
anything.
around him were
She
full
did
of
not.
people who shared his last name.
My father
That
looked
message
at the
from his
window.
dad was a ripple,
Then Annabelle
but
played
not
the
yet a
voicemail.
wave.
Didn't tell me.
Not
My
yet.
grandmother's voice
Ethan
came
had
out of
learned
the conference
early
room
that
speakers
being
and filled the
quiet
air
was
in the way he
easier
filled
than
the
being
diner.
Patricia changed direction. You've always been sensitive about this. There it was. For years, that phrase had ended arguments. I was sensitive about adoption, sensitive about labels, sensitive about Ava being left out. The implication was always that the real problem was not what they had done, but how closely I watched for it. I thought about all the smaller moments I had dismissed after correcting them. My mother once called the other kids her biological
She did not ask how I
grandkids
was.
during a family
She
dinner.
said,
I
Lily,
told her not to
you
separate
embarrassed
them that
Mom
way
in front of a
Ava.
hospital nurse.
She
She'll never
apologized
forgive
and
you.
never used the
Just
phrase
stay
around me
away.
again.
It's
At
better
a
for
summer
everyone.
barbecue, Brittany
I did not
organized a
call my
cousin
sister
soda,
again for
and
26
somehow
months.
Ava was standing
In the
several
summer of
feet away when
2024,
everyone
Cassandra
gathered.
texted me from a
I
coffee
asked
shop in
why.
Greer.
Brittany
Lily,
laughed, pulled
Granny
Ava
moved
into
into Mom and
picture,
Dad's house
and
last
said
week.
she had simply
They're
forgotten.
saying it's just until she
Another
gets stronger.
time, Patricia told a
She's
We
friend
not
all
going
agreed
back
you're
to
not
Travelers.
welcome.
almost like my own granddaughter. I corrected her immediately. She is your granddaughter. Patricia had smiled, touched my arm, and said, Of course she is. You know what I meant. Every time, I treated the correction as success. They stopped using the wrong words. They included Ava in the next photograph. They behaved better when I was watching. I know now that I was measuring the wrong thing. I was measuring compliance. Not belief, Dad came by 2 days later.
I
was
packed
not
my
the kind of
evidence.
man
It's
who
not
dropped in
healthy.
without calling.
I remember
drove
the time when he
135
was
miles
I
to New
remember
Haven.
Granny in the
I
doorway
texted
with a
Sophia
Sophia
from
from
the
the parking lot.
not
I
looking at her
too.
daughter,
I
not
wrote,
looking at
me.
Sophia,
walking
walking
past
past
with
with
the
the
platter
platter
to
to
the
the
Lily is
table
here
as
too.
if the room had been
Yes.
She wrote back.
He nodded.
See,
accepted
she
it.
knew. Vamos.
That surprised
She
me.
had
For
known.
years,
8:58, I walked into
family
Sterling Hall Conference. My
someone trying to
grandfather
be a
Henry
glass
died of
across the
complications. My sister was
from
already
Agent
at the
Orange
table.
exposure.
Our family
He
at
saw
the
her
VA
glance.
had spent
Ground
35
common
years
ground.
the
arguing
committee
about.
was assembling
Asked
on the other.
everyone to consider intentions. This time he said, I heard exactly what Brittany said. And you said nothing. I thought your mother would handle it. Mom told me not to make it bigger. I know. I studied him. Did Mom know Ava had been removed before we got there? Dad hesitated. That was enough. What did she know? She knew Brittany wanted the wedding limited to blood family. I felt something settle heavily in my chest. Did she know Ava had been invited? Yes. And she didn't tell me. No. I leaned back in my chair. Dad rubbed one hand across his forehead. Your mother thought Brittany had the right to decide what immediate family meant on her wedding day. That wasn't what Brittany said. I know. She said real family. I know. There was no argument left in him. Only shame. For the first time, I saw my father's silence for what it was. He had spent years calling himself neutral because he did not want conflict. But neutrality inside a family does not stay neutral for long. Eventually, it becomes support for whoever is willing to hurt people more aggressively. A few days after that, I opened the storage cabinet in my home office, looking for one of Ava's old adoption records. Her school needed an updated copy of a document, and I kept everything from those years in one thick folder. Birth records, court orders, medical summaries, old caseworker notes I had been allowed to keep. Then I found a letter I had forgotten about. It was printed on heavy cream paper with my mother's signature at the bottom. Patricia had written it during my adoption process years earlier. She had been proud of it at the time and had handed me a signed copy herself after submitting the requested family support paperwork. I sat down and read it. Most of the language was exactly what anyone would expect. She wrote about my stability, my home, my relationship with Ava. Then I reached one sentence. Ava will be our granddaughter in every sense that matters. I read it again. My mother had known the right words. More importantly, she had once claimed to believe them. I slid the letter back into the folder instead of calling her. I did not know yet what I would ever do with it. At that moment, it felt less like evidence and more like proof that I had not imagined the family I thought Ava was joining. 2 days later, another email arrived. The sender was Harbor Family Services. The subject line read, Supplementary Family Support Reference Request for Brittany and Nathan Hale. I opened it slowly. The message explained that Brittany and Nathan were pursuing a private domestic adoption and had already provided their standard non-family references. Brittany had also listed me as a supplementary family support reference because I had personal experience with adoption and could speak to the extended family environment a child would enter. I sat there staring at the screen. Then I remembered a conversation from months before the wedding. Brittany had asked me casually, almost as if she were discussing vacation plans, whether I would ever be willing to talk about my experience if she and Nathan decided to adopt. I had said yes. At the time, I thought she was asking whether I supported her. Now Harbor Family Services was asking me whether Brittany supported children like my daughter. Months before Brittany's wedding, she had asked me a question that seemed casual enough at the time. We were sitting at my kitchen table after dinner, and Ava had gone upstairs to finish an assignment. Brittany was stirring sugar into coffee she did not need sweetened when she said, If Nathan and I ever went through with adoption, would you be willing to be a family reference? I remember smiling because I thought the question meant she had finally begun to understand something I had spent years trying to explain. If you're serious about it, yes, I told her. She thanked me, changed the subject, and I never heard another word about it. I had assumed she was exploring possibilities. I did not know she had already decided my experience with Ava would make her application look stronger. The questionnaire from Harbor Family Services was not dramatic. There were no accusations, no legal warnings, no question asking whether Brittany deserved to become a mother. It was a supplementary family support reference, separate from the non-family references Brittany and Nathan had already provided. Most of it was ordinary. How long had I known the applicants? How stable did I consider their relationship? Did I believe their extended family would support a child placed through adoption? What had I observed about their attitudes toward children who were not biologically related to them? That last question sat on my screen longer than all the others combined. I closed the laptop and went upstairs. Ava was sitting cross-legged on her bed with a history book open in front of her and one earbud in. She pulled it out when she saw my face. What happened? I got the reference form. She knew immediately which one I meant. I had told her about the email the night before, but I had not opened the questionnaire until she was at school. Are you going to fill it out? I don't know yet. She watched me carefully. Do you want to? That isn't the same question. I know. I sat at the edge of her desk chair. There's a section about how Brittany and the extended family view adoption. If I answer it honestly, I would have to mention what happened at the wedding. Ava's face tightened, but she did not look surprised. I'm not going to use anything about you without asking, I said. No private messages. No things you told me when you were upset. Nothing you didn't choose. She stared down at the page in front of her for a few seconds. You can tell them what she said. Are you sure? You heard it. Yes. Grandma heard it. Yes. And Brittany already knows she said it. Yes. Ava looked back at me. Then tell the truth. Just don't turn me into a case file without asking me. That sentence stayed with me because it landed exactly where I needed it to. I had been so focused on protecting Ava that I had started thinking in terms of proof, timelines, who said what could be documented. Those instincts were useful, but Ava was not evidence. She was my daughter. We went through the limits together. I could mention the invitation because it had been sent to me. I could mention that Brittany removed Ava from the guest list because I had witnessed the consequence and Brittany admitted doing it. I could quote what Brittany said because I heard it directly. I could mention that Patricia was present. I could use the messages Brittany and my mother sent to me after the wedding. I would not include anything from Ava's private journal, private texts with friends, school counseling, or conversations she had trusted me with after the wedding. When I went back downstairs, the questionnaire looked less complicated. I answered the basic questions first. I had known Brittany her entire life. Nathan had been in the family for several years. I had seen them together at holidays, birthdays, dinners, and during ordinary family life. I did not lie about the things that were good. Nathan had always seemed patient with children. Brittany could be organized, attentive, and generous when she wanted to be. I did not write as though every decent thing about her had suddenly disappeared because I was angry. Then I reached the section about adoption and extended family support. I wrote that Ava was my legally adopted daughter and had been part
Then
of
I
our
noticed
family
the
for
woman
years.
standing 2
I
feet behind
explained that Brittany
Patty.
had formally
Light
invited
blue
both of us to her
scrubs.
wedding.
Name
Ava
tag
had
Brenda
completed an
Markham,
RSVP and meal
RN.
selection,
murmured
and
about
that
the
I
Brittany
didn't
had
recognize
later
her
removed
from this
Ava from
floor.
the final guest
She
list
wasn't a
without
circulating
informing
nurse.
either of us.
She wasn't a
I
charge
wrote the
nurse,
exact sentence
but she had a
Brittany said
notary
when we
stamp in her
arrived.
hand.
This
A
wedding is
lot
for
of
real
South
family.
Carolina
You're
nurses
not
pick up a
blood.
notary
I
commission
stated
for
that Patricia was
$50
present
of
and
side
heard it.
income.
I stated that
Patty had
as
clearly
of the day
arranged
I
it
was
ahead of
completing the
time.
form,
She had
Brittany
been
had not
waiting for the
apologized
morphine.
directly to Ava. Then I stopped. My first draft had a final paragraph that said I did not believe Brittany was emotionally prepared to adopt a child. I deleted it. That was not mine to decide. I was not a social worker. I was not an evaluator. I was not going to turn anger into an expert opinion I did not have the qualifications to make. Instead, I wrote one sentence. I cannot honestly describe Brittany's current view of adoptive family relationships as fully equal to biological family relationships based on what I personally witnessed. That was all. I had not submitted the form yet when Brittany called. Her voice was controlled at first. I heard Harbor sent you the reference. They did. So you're filling it out? Yes. There was a pause. You remember you said you would be my reference. I remember. Then I don't understand why Mom says you're acting like this is some kind of weapon. Mom shouldn't know anything about what I'm doing. That's not the point. It is one of them. Brittany exhaled sharply. Megan, you promised me. I promised to be a reference. I didn't promise to lie. I'm not asking you to lie. Then we shouldn't have a problem. Her tone changed. The wedding was a private family issue. I looked at the questionnaire on my screen. You listed me as a family support reference. Yes. You told them I had personal experience with adoption. Yes. You wanted me to help show them what kind of extended family an adopted child would enter. That doesn't mean you get to drag wedding drama into it. You removed an adopted child from your wedding because she wasn't blood. That is not what happened. It is exactly what happened. No, it was about the kind of day I wanted. And what kind was that? She went quiet. I did not fill the silence for her. Finally, she said, I wanted the people closest to me there. Ava had already been invited. Megan, you don't get to ask me to describe how you treat adopted family and then tell me the one clear example I have is off limits.
60 years
Your
of her
sister
career
will be
in
dismissed
Tennessee.
from medical school.
I'm
There was
angry.
the singer.
She will
There
never
was
become
another
a doctor.
And there was the small
But I
cedar
can be
box. Is that
angry
what
and
Lily
still
would
tell the
want?
truth.
Called.
Brittany
Lily
poured
would
out
want
without
both
saying
of
she
She
wanted
never
to be
let me
doctor.
open
My
that
mother
one.
called 20 minutes
Lily
later.
would want healing.
That
You'll
told me
know
enough.
what to do with the
You
important
not
one
one
when tearing
sisters.
Hunt's family
Patricia
apart.
said.
By the
I
time
haven't
I
done
was a
anything
teenager,
planned.
I had a
You know
private
exactly
theater
what I
that my
meant.
mother
No,
hated this room.
what I
Your
know is
father
that
Patty
Patty called
performed
me because she
Christianity
wants
the
me
way
to
some
fix
women
this.
perform
Megan, she
yoga.
has been through
At
enough.
11:23,
I
when the
thought
father
there was
texted me
nothing
separately
funny
in front
about
of the
it.
right people.
Ava was removed from a wedding and told she wasn't family. And now Brittany could lose the chance to become a mother. Then maybe the truth about how she views adopted children matters. You are deliberately making this sound worse than it was. I'm quoting her. She was upset. She planned the guest list change 2 days earlier. Patricia lowered her voice. Some things should stay inside a family. That sentence made me sit straighter. If something has to stay secret to keep looking acceptable, that should worry you. This isn't about secrecy, it's about loyalty. No, it's about whether you want me to protect Brittany from the consequences of something she actually believes. You don't know what she believes. I know what she said. And one sentence can destroy her future? I'm not deciding her future. Then don't interfere with it. I looked at the form again. She put my name on it. My mother had no answer to that. After we hung up, I still did not submit the reference. That was the part nobody in my family seemed able to understand later. I did not rush to send it while I was furious. I left the draft open overnight and told myself I would read it again in the morning. If there was one sentence written to punish Brittany instead of answer the question, I would take it out. That evening, Dad called. He had been quieter since coming to my house and admitting what he heard at the wedding. I still wanted to believe that mattered. I told him, carefully, that Harbor Family Services had contacted me and that I was trying to decide how to answer. I'm not asking you to take sides, I said. I just don't want Mom involved while I'm figuring this out. I understand, he said. I believed him. The next morning, before I had even finished my coffee, a message from Dad appeared on my phone. Your mother knows about the reference. I'm sorry. I stared at the screen. There was only one person I had told. And once again, my father had decided that keeping the peace mattered more than keeping his word. Dad came over that evening before I could call him back. He stood on my porch with the same expression he had worn after the wedding, the one that made him look older than 65. I let him in, but I did not offer coffee this time. Why did you tell her? I asked. He sat at the kitchen table and rubbed his palms together. Because I thought if your mother knew what was at stake, she'd make Brittany fix this before you sent anything. I stared at him. So, I specifically asked you not to involve Mom, and you decided the best way to help was to involve Mom. He winced. I thought an apology could keep this from getting worse. You thought you could manage us again. That landed. Dad looked down at the table. Yes. For once, he did not follow it with an explanation about intentions or family peace. I was wrong. You trusted me, and I broke that trust. I was still angry, but the fact that he did not demand immediate forgiveness mattered. Don't do it again, I said. If I tell you something privately, you don't get to decide Patricia needs to know for everyone's own good. He nodded. I understand. By the next morning, I understood exactly what his mistake had set in motion. Brittany sent me a long text labeled in effect as an apology, though Ava's name appeared only twice. I'm sorry she felt excluded, Brittany wrote. I never wanted her to feel hurt. I was under enormous pressure and trying to create an intimate family atmosphere. I hope we can move forward. It was carefully constructed to apologize for Ava's feelings without admitting a single choice Brittany had made. Worse, she sent it to me, not to Ava. Patricia followed less than an hour later. Brittany is trying. You've made your point. Please be reasonable now. I read both messages at my desk and realized they were not trying to repair anything. They were trying to create a cleaner record before I submitted mine. That realization pushed me into exactly the kind of behavior I later had to admit was one of my flaws. I opened a new document and started building a timeline. The cousin's photo, the biological grandchildren comment. The afternoon Patricia called Ava almost like my own. Every strange holiday remark, every family gathering where Ava had been added after I noticed she was missing, every apology that had come only after I objected. I pulled screenshots from years of messages and dropped them into folders by date. I told myself I was being thorough. In reality, I was angry. An organization was the form my anger took when I did not trust myself to yell. Ava came into my office looking for a charger and stopped when she saw the screen. "What is all that?" "Nothing you need to worry about." She leaned closer. "That's Grandma's text from my sophomore year." I minimized the window, suddenly feeling caught doing something I could not defend as easily as I expected. I was just making sure I had everything straight. For the agency? Maybe. Ava folded her arms. "Mom, I said you could tell them what happened at the wedding." "I know. I didn't say every bad thing that's ever happened to me should become evidence." The word hit harder because it was almost exactly what she had warned me about before. I had listened to her in theory and then started doing the thing anyway. "You're right," I said. She watched me for a moment, making sure I meant it. "I'm not saying forget it," she said. "I just don't want some stranger reading my whole life because Brittany was awful at her wedding." "You're right," I repeated. I crossed the line. After Ava left, I reopened the document and deleted most of it. Not because the incidents were meaningless. They mattered enormously to me, and they mattered to Ava. But the form had asked about Brittany's current attitude toward adoption and the extended family environment. I did not need 6 years of accumulated resentment to answer that. I had the invitation. I had the guest list removal. I had Brittany's exact words. I had Patricia standing there. I had the absence of any direct apology to Ava. I reread my response 3 times. I removed one adjective that sounded more like judgment than observation. I checked every date I mentioned. Then I submitted it. A confirmation page appeared from Harbor Family Services saying my supplementary family support reference had been received. I closed the browser and told Ava it was done. I also told her the promise I had made to myself. Unless the agency contacted me with a direct follow-up question, I would not send anything else. Brittany knew the reference had been completed that afternoon. I learned later that the applicant portal showed only whether requested references were pending or received. It did not show what I had written. That distinction became important because she immediately tried to make me tell her. "What did you say?" she texted.
Too.
I answered the
But
question.
Granny
all of
knew the
it.
difference.
What exactly
Lily
did you
would.
say about the
On
wedding?
the evening
Because
of
you
April
are not
7th,
discussing
the
my
night
She said it
before
the
the
way she
hearing,
said everything
Juliet
twice.
called me,
I
slow.
did
Her
not
voice was
answer.
broken
Okay.
but
Then another
practiced.
message
And
appeared.
Elizabeth, she did not
Blood
leave
relatives are
herself.
different.
I will lose
Stop
everything.
pretending
you weren't
you
paying
don't
I will
understand
lose
what I
Yale.
meant.
The lesson moved
I will
on
lose
without
my
a
future.
future.
Over the next
I am
20
23
years,
years walked me
old,
through
I
what
made
was in a
mistakes.
cedar
Said the
box
words
on the
had come out
table. I
wrong.
said, and what
I
will
was
one
angry
day
and
be?
angry.
You did
In the
not make
box
a
on
mistake.
that
High
message
shelf.
removed
You wrote
the last
5,000 There were
words
11
about a
letters
child's
my
life.
grandfather
Less than
Henry had
6
written
hours
her.
not
I
exhausted.
unfolded it. Lily,
She was not
pencil,
standing
call
in a
this
wedding
woman.
dress
A child
with
holding the
100
hand
things
of a
happening
woman.
at
For
once.
14 days, I had not
She
been
was
ready.
sitting
Both of them
somewhere
looking
with
at
enough
each
time
other.
to
14
type,
days, I had been
reread,
the daughter
send
who still
exactly
hoped
what
her
she
mother
had
would
said.
say something
I took
true.
one
For when
screenshot
you
and sent
graduate,
it.
my mother had just
Nothing
answered
else.
the question for
That
me.
restraint
I
mattered
set
to
the
me
alarm.
more
I
than
took a
the sum of my
photograph of it where it lay.
self-esteem.
Tomorrow I would drive
closed
100
the drawer.
miles
I would have
south.
added the
I put the
message
original
to a
in the
small
inner pocket of my
office
Augusta
skirt.
Road in Greenville. I went
Now I
downstairs.
saved
I
the
would
one
meet a
photo
woman
from
my
when she was
grandmother
in the
had
dining
been
room
sitting across from
Juliet
since I
had
was
been
16
notified
years
by the
old.
Yale
The
committee
same
on mistake that night. Brittany should have chosen better words, Patricia wrote, but biological family is different. You know that. It doesn't mean Ava isn't loved. I read the message at the kitchen counter, then went to my office and opened the old adoption folder. Patricia's signed letter was exactly where I had left it. Ava will be our granddaughter in every sense that matters. I placed my phone beside the paper. One version of my mother had written that when supporting my adoption. Another version, years later, had written that biological family was different. For the first time, I stopped wondering which version was real. Both were. My mother believed in equality when equality cost her nothing. The wedding had shown me what happened when she had to choose between that principle and Brittany. 2 days later, Harbor Family Services emailed again. The message was brief and professional. They had one follow-up question about the factual account I had provided and wanted clarification on whether Brittany herself had confirmed removing Ava from the guest list. I
Marion,
answered
we
only
all
that
so my
agreed you're
sister
not
could
welcome
come.
at the wedding.
3 days
No
later,
punctuation,
the hospital
no
coordinator
explanation.
from Interim
Just that
Healthcare in
smug
Greenville
little
called
dash
me.
she always
Polite
used in
voice,
place of a period.
Southern,
Ethan
careful.
stared at the
Minutes
message,
later,
unsure
your
if his
parents
eyes
had
were playing
indicated
tricks
that
on
for their
him.
patient's
He
emotional
read it again.
stability,
I read it twice.
Then
certain
again.
family
The
members
words
should
didn't
not
change.
visit
It
unannounced.
wasn't entirely a shock,
I'm so
though.
sorry.
Until that
The
moment,
signs
This is
had
a
been there
family
subtle,
decision we have to
accumulating over
respect.
months.
Me,
He hadn't
I
been
sat
included in the group
parking lot
photo
of
planning,
Walgreens with the call
hadn't
on the
received an
dashboard
invite to the
speaker.
engagement.
I did not answer Nathan right away. His message sat on my screen for almost 10 minutes while I tried to decide whether he was asking a question or issuing a warning. I wish you had spoken to us before answering the agency could mean he thought I had blindsided them. It could also mean Brittany had already told him enough of her version that he saw me as the person causing trouble. Either way, I was not going to pull Ava into another conversation without asking her first. She was at the kitchen table working through a college application essay when I showed her the message. Nathan contacted me. Ava looked up. About the reference? I think so. What does he want? I don't know yet. But if he asks what happened at the wedding, I'm not going to answer without checking with you. She read the message, then pushed my phone back across the table. If he's planning to adopt a kid with her, he should know what she said. That's what I was thinking. Just tell him what happened, not everything. I won't. Ava went back to her laptop, and I realized how much I had changed in a few weeks. Before the wedding, I would have decided for her what information was necessary, told myself I was protecting her, and moved forward. Now I understood that protecting her also meant letting her decide what parts of her own experience belonged in someone else's conversation. I replied to Nathan that I was willing to speak by phone if he wanted the facts. He called 20 minutes later.
Or anything else in your family's
I
replied
replied
with one sentence. Anything physical, actually
I'm going
connected
to
to
be
call
direct.
grandma's
I
lawyer,
don't
and I knew the
understand why
she
you
really
involved the
trusted.
agency
I just
before
did not
talking
know
about
where
it
it
was
was
yet.
It wasn't
I
my
didn't
lawyer who
involve the
called. I
agency.
called
It was
Sophia.
theirs. They contacted you because of what
His
you
voice
said.
I had not called her
They
in 4
contacted me
months.
because Brittany
We need
listed
picked
you
up
as a
nervous.
family
Right the way
photo
she
documents.
always picked up.
He
They
went
did
thought
not
they had won.
recognize
I
the number on the
continued.
screen. They had no idea
I didn't call
every
them the
cruel
name.
thing they did in
I
that
didn't
hospice
the
room.
caseworker.
I had been watching them.
I didn't
I need
hold
to ask
them.
you something. My name
Did
is
you ever
Lily
meet my
Slater in
mother?
person. 33.
I know she listed you. Then what exactly do you think I should have done? I thought if there was a problem, you would have come to us first. I did have a problem. It happened at your wedding. Another pause. Then Nathan asked a question that changed the entire conversation. What exactly did Brittany say to Ava? The way he asked it made me sit up straighter. What did she tell you? I'm asking you. No, Nathan. If we're going to do this, I need to know what you think happened. He exhaled. She said there was confusion over the final guest count. She said Ava wasn't on the finalized list. You got angry because the venue couldn't add another seat, and you decided to leave before the ceremony. I closed my eyes. That isn't what happened. He did not argue. I told him about the invitation, the RSVP, Ava's meal selection, the family photo message. I told him the coordinator had shown me a final list with Ava removed. I told him Brittany admitted she had made the change 2 days earlier. Then I told him the sentence. This wedding is for real family, you're not blood. Nathan did not speak for several seconds. Finally he said, She said that to Ava? Yes. Directly? Yes. And your mother was there? Yes. What did Patricia say? Not to make it bigger. Nathan's breathing changed, barely, but enough that I could hear it through the phone. Did Ava come without being invited? No. Do you still have the RSVP? Yes. Can you send it to me? I hesitated for a second, not because the document was private, but because I wanted to be sure I was not sliding back into building a case. The RSVP was mine. It contained no private information Ava had not already agreed I could share. Yes. I forwarded it while we were still on the call. A minute later, Nathan said, I see it. Megan Carter and Ava Carter. Yes. 2 meals. Yes. Another silence. Then he said, That is not what I was told. I had expected anger from him. I had prepared myself to defend the reference. Instead, I found myself listening to a man realizing his wife had lied to him. I'm not asking you to take my side, I said. I'm telling you what happened because you asked. I know. His voice sounded different now, less sharp, more tired. After a moment, he said, "There's something you probably don't know about me." I waited. My stepfather raised me. I knew Nathan's parents had divorced when he was young, but I had never heard much more than that. My biological father was around enough to make promises, he said. Not enough to keep them. My stepdad showed up when I was 8. He taught me to drive, sat through every awful school concert, helped me move into college. He's the person I call Dad. I said nothing because there was nothing useful to add. Nathan continued. When Brittany and I first talked about adoption, I told her I didn't care how our child came into our family. The person who stays is the parent. That's what I grew up knowing. That explained more than any argument could have. Did Brittany know how strongly you felt about that? Yes. I looked toward the hallway. Ava's bedroom door was closed. Nathan said. She told me your family understood adoption because of you and Ava. There it was. What did she say? She said you would probably be our strongest family support example. That adoption was already normal in the family. That everyone understood there wasn't a difference between an adopted child and a biological one. I almost laughed, but the feeling in my chest was too bitter. 2 weeks before the wedding, Brittany had been willing to use Ava as proof that her family embraced adoption. Then, when photographs, seating, and appearances mattered, Ava became someone who did not count. She asked me months ago if I'd be willing to serve as that reference, I said.
Through hospital
She told
security
me.
under the
She
Internal
never told me
Volunteer
you'd already
Coordination
started the
Audit
process.
Policy.
I thought
She had been at Boston
No.
Children's
Nathan went
24
quiet
years.
again.
They
Then he
trusted
asked,
her.
"Do
The
you have
first
message
file
about
was
the
my
family
patient
pictures?"
navigator log.
Yes.
3,200 total
intelligence.
hours across
Battery
my
saves
caseload.
power and updates are automatic.
1,180
So
of
even
those
if work
hours were
interrupts you,
specifically with Lily Donovan
Don't
and her
probe
mother.
it.
Bedside reading, translation, family conferences, hospice
I looked at
support.
the
We're
text
Phoenix
one more
Energy,
After-hours
a
visits
family-owned
belonged to me. It was directly relevant. Ava had already given me permission to use it. Yes. I sent the screenshot. Nathan did not ask for anything else. He did not ask me to forward years of family messages or tell him every bad thing Brittany had ever done. I appreciated that more than I expected. Instead, he said, I need to ask you one more question. Okay. Did Brittany apologize to Ava afterward? No. Did she apologize to you? She sent me something that said she was sorry Ava felt excluded. Nathan gave a short, humorless breath. That's not an apology. No. He was quiet long enough that I almost asked whether he was still there. Then he said, I need to ask my wife a question I should have asked before we started this process. What question? I'm not sure I'm ready to say it out loud yet. I did not push. That was the strange part. A month earlier, I would have wanted the answer immediately. I would have wanted to know when
Phone
Nathan
lit up
planned
again.
We're going to play three
A
things.
message.
Annabelle
Whether
said.
This
the
time,
reference would
it
change
wasn't
Then
from
we're going to
Marilyn.
talk.
By then,
It wasn't from
She started
Rachel.
clip 3.
It wasn't even
My
from one
mother
of the
watched
cousins,
herself.
who
On a
likely had
wall
no
mounted
idea
screen
what had
was
just
a stranger's
happened.
conference
It was
room.
from
For the
his
first time
father,
since the
Slide
wedding,
her
Thomas
own
Miller.
mother's
I understood
engagement
You
ring
around?
off her own
I think you
mother's
should
finger.
see something.
The
Just
audio
that.
was
One
perfectly
version
7
clear.
for
words.
herself to harbor
No
It's okay,
drama,
Mama.
no
I'm just gonna
emotion.
look at
another
it.
version to Nathan.
Just a quiet
Don't
flag
worry.
in the
Another version
wind,
to our relatives.
signaling
mother
that whatever
opened
Ethan had
those
assumed
versions
about the
were beginning to
boundaries of
collide.
this family
That's
2 days
fracture.
later, Nathan sent me one more message. I asked Brittany whether an adopted daughter and a biological daughter would both be equally ours. I stared at the screen. Then I read the second line. She still hasn't answered me. Brittany called me the same evening Nathan sent that message. I let it ring once before answering because I already knew she would not be calling to apologize. What did you say to him? I leaned against the kitchen counter. Nathan asked me what happened at the wedding. You had no right to get involved in my marriage. You involved me when you put my name on your adoption paperwork. That is not the same thing. No, it isn't. She went quiet for a moment, then said, You're poisoning him against me. I had heard versions of that accusation from my mother for years. If someone reacted badly to the truth, the problem was the person who spoke it. Tell me what I said to Nathan that wasn't true. You made everything sound calculated. You removed Ava from the guest list 2 days before the wedding. That doesn't mean I sat around planning to hurt her. I didn't say you did. You told him I don't see her as family. I told him what you said. Brittany made a frustrated sound. You keep doing that like one sentence explains everything. It wasn't one sentence anymore. She stopped. I continued. You texted me afterward that blood relatives are different. That is true. Her answer came so quickly that I almost missed the significance. Then explain it. I shouldn't have to. You're asking people to believe you could bring an adopted child into your family and treat that child exactly like any biological child you might have someday. So yes, I think you should be able to explain what you mean. I never said I couldn't love an adopted child. That isn't what Nathan asked you. Her silence told me she knew exactly where I was going. Finally, she said, different doesn't automatically mean less. Then what does it mean? It means there are things biology gives you that adoption doesn't. Like what? History, connection, family resemblance, knowing where you come from. I thought about Ava and all the years we had spent making sure she understood that adoption did not require pretending her life started with me. Her history mattered. Her first family mattered. Her questions mattered. None of those things made her less my daughter. That's not what you told Ava at the wedding. I was trying to explain why I wanted the day a certain way. You told her she wasn't real family. I used the wrong words, but you still believed the idea behind them. Brittany's voice hardened. You are determined to make me sound horrible. No, I'm trying to understand why you think an adopted child can be fully yours while also believing blood creates a higher level of family. I didn't say higher. You keep saying different. Every time a choice had to be made, Ava was the one pushed out. At some point, different starts having a direction. She did not answer that. Instead, she said, you have no idea what Nathan and I have been through. I knew then we had reached the part of the conversation she had been protecting. What do you mean? Her voice changed. Some of the anger went out of it. We didn't just wake up one morning and decide adoption would be interesting. I waited. We've been trying to have a baby for almost 3 years. I had known there had been doctor appointments. I had known my mother occasionally became strangely defensive whenever anyone asked Brittany about children. I had not known the extent of it, and I had never asked because I considered that her private life. Brittany continued. There were tests, treatments, months of thinking maybe this time would be different. Then more disappointment. I'm sorry, she laughed once bitterly. Are you? Yes, I can disagree with you and still be sorry you went through that. Her breathing softened slightly. Then she said, Nathan acts like choosing adoption means I'm supposed to pretend biology means nothing to me. That isn't what he told me. Well, that's what it feels like. What does biology mean to you? She did not answer immediately. I still want to know what it would feel like to have one of our own. There it was. I did not react right away because I wanted to be certain I had heard her correctly. One of your own? You know what I mean. Yes, I do. That doesn't mean an adopted child wouldn't be ours. But you just used different language for the two. Oh my God, Megan. I'm not attacking you for wanting a biological child. It sounds like it. I'm asking whether you've actually separated that grief from the child you're trying to bring into your home. She went quiet again. I did not tell her she should not adopt. I did not tell her she was unfit. Those were not my decisions. But for the first time, I could see the contradiction clearly. Brittany wanted adoption to be enough to make her a mother while still holding on to a private category called one of our own. Later that night, my mother came to my house. I almost did not let her in. Then I saw Dad's car was not behind hers, which told me she had come alone, and I decided I would hear what she wanted once. Patricia did not sit. You need to stop pushing your sister. I'm not calling her. Nathan is questioning everything now. He should ask questions before they bring a child into their marriage. She is already devastated by what she's been through. Her fertility struggles do not excuse what she did to Ava. I didn't say they did. You keep asking me to behave
About
as
to
though they
fold.
do. My mother
You
folded
just
her
made an
arms.
enemy of this
You
family.
can love 2
2
children
weeks
differently
later, my father
without
emailed
loving
me
one
a
less.
single
That
paragraph
was the sentence
informing
that made
me
me
I
leave the
was no
kitchen
longer
and walk into
welcome
my
at
office.
family gatherings
When I
until
came
I
back, I was holding
apologized
the
for the
old letter.
scene at the
I
hospital.
placed it on the table
I
between
did
us.
not
Patricia
apologize.
recognized her
I
signature
started
before
no
she read the
contact
first
on a
paragraph.
Tuesday in
Her
early
expression
September of
shifted.
2023.
You wrote this when
What I
Ava's
did not
adoption was being
know,
finalized.
what nobody
I
told me
remember.
until
I
2.5
pointed to the
years
sentence
later,
I had read days
was
earlier.
that 2 weeks
Ava will be
after
our
that.
granddaughter in every sense that matters. My mother looked away. You understood exactly what adoption meant when you wrote that. I still love Ava. That isn't what I asked. She is my granddaughter. Then when did in every sense that matters become biological family is different? Patricia's face tightened. Life is more complicated than something I wrote years ago. No. Life is more revealing than something you wrote when saying the right thing cost you nothing. She looked at me sharply. I did not raise
On
my
a
voice.
hospital sketchpad.
You
My
stood at
ID
Brittany's
badge was
wedding
it
and
showed me
watched
sitting
her
in a
remove
chair.
Ava
I had
from
pulled my
Lily's
phone
bed.
out only to
Holding her
check the
hand.
time.
Then afterwards,
On the
defended
subject
the
line
belief
was
my
my
mother's
mother's voice,
If
in her
that is
lawyer
to
shaky
cause
handwriting.
someone bad
5
by
words. Final
accident.
terms for the
For
return
when
of
you
mom's
graduate,
belongings.
you are
Lily,
determined
please
to
read
punish
in
all
full
of us.
before responding.
No,
I said,
I'm
I
done
set the
helping
cup
you
down
focus
before
on
I
something
read the
smaller.
I never
first
got
line.
line.
She left with
There I
her
knew
hands
the
on her
cadence of
silence.
her language,
Dad
even in
came by
print. She
2 days
started
later.
crying
She had
very
been a Sunday
quietly
school
into the
teacher
phone.
at
First Baptist
She looked
career for
uncomfortable before
22
he sat
CLOs.
down.
I
There's something else I should have told you. I waited. A few days before the wedding, your mother said Brittany wanted one day surrounded by her real family. I felt my jaw tighten. What exactly did Mom say? Dad looked at the floor. Her words were, "For once, Brittany should be surrounded by her real family." And what did you say? Not enough. That isn't an answer. I told her Ava was family too. Then your mother said I knew what she meant, and I let it drop. I closed my eyes for a second. Dad continued. I didn't know Brittany was going to remove Ava from the guest list. I believe you, but I heard the language before the wedding, and I didn't stop to ask what it meant in practice. That mattered, not because it made Patricia the mastermind. She had not ordered Brittany to remove Ava. Brittany had made that choice herself. But Patricia had given the belief permission. She had created a version of real family in which Brittany's decision could feel reasonable. Around the same time, Harbor Family Services sent me one brief follow-up question about my statement. They wanted to confirm whether Brittany herself had acknowledged making the guest list change. I answered that she had, because I heard her say so at the venue. That was all I knew directly from the agency. Everything about the larger adoption process came to me later through Nathan. That distinction mattered because I was not part of their case. I was one reference answering one set of questions. 2 nights after Dad's visit, Nathan texted me. I asked Brittany something. I waited. Then another message appeared. I asked if we adopted a daughter, and later had a biological daughter, whether they would both be equally ours. I stared at the screen longer than I meant to. The third message arrived. She still hasn't answered me. A week after Nathan told me Brittany still had not answered him, my mother sent a Christmas invitation, as if the previous 3 months had been an unfortunate scheduling conflict. She did not call. She did not apologize. She sent a group text with the time, the menu, and a final sentence that told me exactly what she wanted from the day. Let's not carry all of this into the holidays. I read it twice, then locked my phone and decided we were not going. Ava surprised me when I told her. I want to see Grandpa. You can see Grandpa without going to Mom's house. I know. She closed the college catalog she had been reading and looked at me. But he's going to be there, and I don't want Grandma deciding I stayed away because I'm embarrassed. You don't owe her proof of anything. I'm not going for her. That stopped me. For months I had been telling myself I was learning to let Ava make choices about her own relationships, and here I was about to make one for her because I wanted to protect her from another bad night. I sat down across from her. What would make you comfortable going? Knowing we can leave whenever I want. That part is easy. And I'm not doing some giant family picture where everyone acts like nothing happened. You don't have to. If Grandma starts talking about forgiveness, I'm leaving. Fair. Ava narrowed her eyes. You mean it? I mean you don't have to stay somewhere just because I'm staying. That became our plan. We would drive separately from everyone else and park where we could leave without being blocked in. We would stay about an hour unless Ava genuinely wanted longer. No overnight visit, no rides with relatives, no obligation to stay through dessert, and no photographs unless Ava chose to be in them. We also picked a simple signal. If she touched the small silver ring she wore on her right hand and looked at me, I would get our coats. No questions until we were in the car. I did not tell Patricia any of those details. I simply replied that Ava and I would stop by for a short visit. Nathan texted me 2 days before Christmas. His message was brief. Things are not fine, but I'll be there. I stared at it for a while, then wrote, understood. I did not ask whether he and Brittany had resolved anything, whether the adoption process had changed, or what he planned to do. By then, I had finally learned that knowing everything in advance was not the same thing as being prepared. Nathan's marriage was his responsibility. My responsibility was walking into my mother's house with Ava, and making sure we could walk back out on our own terms. Christmas afternoon was cold and gray, the kind of Ohio winter day where the sky seemed to press down on the rooftops without quite deciding whether to snow. Patricia's driveway was already crowded when Ava and I arrived, but I found a spot near the street. She noticed. "Strategic parking?" Ava asked. "Extremely." That got a small smile out of her before we went inside. My mother had decorated as if decoration itself could prove we were still a family. Garland wrapped the staircase. Candles burned on the mantel. The dining table was set with the same red and gold plates she had used since I was a teenager. For half a second, the familiarity almost worked on me.
At the wedding, my mom texted
Also,
me.
they
Smug
made her
as ever.
sign something.
No
The
punctuation.
house deed.
Just her signature,
Joint
dashed like a
tenancy
slap in the
and
face,
another
wrapped in formal tone.
She told
I
me
didn't
she did
reply.
stitched
I
she
logged into
trusted
my
me
account,
already.
transferred the $6,500 honeymoon fund back to myself, and canceled the business class flights I booked under her name.
What my mother
No
did not
shouting,
know
no
was that
drama.
the woman whose
Just a
signature
quiet
she had
little
just
click.
collected
By
had
morning, I
already
had 23
11
missed
months
calls.
earlier,
But there
sat
was
But
no
only
downtown
one
performance attached to them. Patricia had expected the stalking to do the work of an apology without requiring her to make one. She hugged me first, then reached for Ava. Ava gave her a brief side hug and stepped away. I did not interfere. For the next 20 minutes, my mother behaved as though she were hosting a Christmas commercial. She offered food every few minutes. She asked Ava about college applications. She told a story about Dad burning the rolls the year I was 12. Nothing she said was hostile, and that was exactly what made the room feel so tense. Every normal sentence carried an unspoken demand that we agree normality had been restored. Then Patricia brought out her phone. "Before everyone sits down, I want one picture of all my girls." I watched Ava's hand before I looked at her face. She did not touch the ring. She simply said, "No, thank you." My mother blinked. "It'll take 5 seconds." "I don't want to." "Ava, honey, I thought—" She said no, I said. Patricia looked at me. "I wasn't asking you." "Good. Then you already have her answer." Ava gave me the smallest glance. Not gratitude exactly. More confirmation that I had done what I promised. Patricia put the phone down without another word. Brittany arrived about 15 minutes later with Nathan. They did not come through the door like newlyweds celebrating their first Christmas. Nathan carried one gift bag and kept his coat on longer than
Brenda put the
necessary.
stamp back in her
Brittany
bag.
walked ahead of him.
She
and
walked
kissed
out of the
Patricia
room
on her
without
cheek,
saying a
but
word.
barely looked at me.
My
or
mother's
Ava.
face turned the
Nathan
color
said
of
hello
cooked
to
beef.
Ava first.
She
Good
stood
to
up,
see you.
smoothed
Me
her
too.
cardigan,
There was nothing
picked up the
dramatic in
folder,
exchange.
and motioned me into the
That
hallway
made
with
it feel
2
more
fingers.
sincere than
In the
anything
hallway,
Patricia
she did
had
not
done
raise
since
her
we
voice.
arrived.
My
Brittany
mother
waited until
never
Ava
raised her
went into
voice
the
in
kitchen
public.
with Dad before approaching
She
me
leaned
near
in
the dining
close
room.
enough that I could
"The
smell
night
her
goes
morning
wrong,"
coffee.
she said quietly. "It's
You don't
already."
understand what we're
I
trying to
almost
protect
asked
her
what she
from.
thought I had planned.
From what, Mom? Bed at night.
Instead,
That overly
I looked at
formal
She did it
tone
because
she
she was a
used
good
when she
daughter.
wanted to sound
She did it
above
on
the
an
chaos
iPad
she
signed
often
into an
created,
Apple ID that
as though she
uploaded
were a
every
school
minute of
principal
footage
handing
to
down a
family
suspension,
iCloud drive
rather
she
than a
had never
mother
logged
cutting
into
out
in
her own
life.
son from a family
She had hung a
milestone.
camera in
The
the
room
room,
felt unusually
and then she
quiet,
had pointed it
as if
at
the air
herself.
itself had paused to
Cassandra
see what he would
texted
do
me on a
next.
Wednesday.
Exactly what I said.
But
She
Ethan
was
didn't
wearing a
move.
camel trench
He
coat.
didn't pace.
was
He didn't
talking
write
to
a
Dad
furious
across the
email or
room.
Want to
call
lose weight
anyone.
without losing muscle?
Instead,
Factor
he
got me
opened
there.
a blank
I
document
was
on
tired
his
of all the
laptop
cutting and
You've done
bulking
enough.
typed
cycles.
Every
You've had
email
it.
she had ever
I
sent
answered
this
the phone
opened the
and asked
same
you
way.
guys.
I thought you had
Lily,
it.
this isn't just about
Your
a phone.
father and I
have
have prayed about this for 5 minutes.
Before
I told her what your grandmother left for you. I told her about the Yale committee,
after you come to the
about
house,
Juliet's
leaving the door
essay,
open.
face us in person, about the
There's
letter
something
Marlowe
about
had
Joe's
on
desk,
video.
he said.
3 months. She
My
listened
stomach
without
started
That was how
speaking.
long my grandmother had been
What?
at the end, she
Nathan
said.
called me last
I
week.
scrolled. What do you need me to
About
do?
what?
41 bullet
I
told her I would call her
I
back. I
read
read
it.
them once the way
There
you
was
read the
something
lab
I had
report
to
for
never
a
said
patient
anything
you
about
don't know
being
yet.
about
Evening of
being a
March
real
says,
family before the
drug-free
wedding.
workplace,
And what did you tell him?
random
The
testing
truth.
in effect.
I looked at Dad
I had
carefully.
passed my December
All of it?
screen 3 weeks
Enough.
earlier. I called
I
my
told
old
him
church
about
friend
what your mother
Bethany on
said before the
speakerphone
wedding,
and asked
that
her
Brittany should have
gently
one day
what
surrounded
people
by her
were
real
saying.
family.
She
I told
paused
him I
for a
didn't know
long
Ava was
time.
going to be
She
removed.
said,
I also told
Patty
him I
says
should have
you've been
challenged the
struggling
wording
with
harder when I
substances
heard
and
it.
toxic
I felt something
influences.
loosen in me that I
She
had
says
not
they've had to
realized
set
was still
hard
tense.
boundaries to
You
protect
didn't warn
Mama.
Mom first?
Substances
Did you
and
tell
toxic
Brittany?
influence.
No. Dad looked toward the living room. I'm done carrying messages. That was the first time I believed his apology might become something more than words. I went back to the coat closet where I had left my handbag and touched the cream envelope inside. I had prepared it the night before. I had kept it simple. No giant evidence file. No years of screenshots. No private material from Ava. No attempt to humiliate anyone in front of relatives. Inside was the signed copy of Patricia's old adoption support letter, the message she sent me after the wedding saying biological family was different, and a short note from me stating that I had completed the supplementary family support reference truthfully and would not retract factual information because the family found the consequences uncomfortable. That was all. I did not plan to give it to Patricia unless she pushed the subject again. Then I heard her voice from the living room. "Megan, come here a second." When I walked back in, Patricia was standing beside the Christmas cards on the side table. I took the envelope from my bag and placed it among them. Her eyes dropped to it immediately. "What's that?" I looked at Ava first. She was beside Dad, calm, watching me. Then I looked at my mother. "Something you should read before you ask me to fix this family again." Patricia reached for the envelope, and for the first time that afternoon, the room went completely quiet. My mother opened the envelope slowly, as if the weight of the paper had already told her there was something inside she would not like. The first thing she pulled out was the old letter. I watched her eyes move down the page until they reached her own signature. Her fingers tightened at the bottom corner. Then she turned to the second sheet, the screenshot of the message she had sent me after the wedding. "Brittany should have chosen better words, but biological family is different. You know that. It doesn't mean Ava isn't loved." Patricia read it once, then again, and the color drained from her face. "You didn't," she said quietly. Her eyes lifted to mine. "Please tell me you didn't." I answered honestly. The room stayed silent long enough for me to hear the furnace kick on somewhere beneath us. Brittany had stopped beside the dining table. Nathan was standing near Dad, his arms loose at his sides, watching my mother rather than me. Ava had not moved from where she stood near the sofa. Patricia lowered the papers. "You actually sent this to the agency?" "I sent my reference to the agency. You know what I mean. I told them what I personally witnessed. I didn't send them this envelope." My mother looked down at the old letter again. "You could ruin Brittany's chance to become a mother over one family argument. I didn't make a decision about Brittany's adoption. You knew there could be consequences." "Yes." The answer made her flinch more than an excuse would have. "You could have kept this inside the family." Dad spoke before I did. "If the truth can't leave the house, that's not privacy." Patricia turned toward him. "Daniel, stay out of this." "No." It was one word, but I had never heard him say it to her that way. My mother stared at him. Dad continued. "I stayed out of it at the wedding. That was part of the problem." Patricia looked back at me, clearly searching for another way to make the envelope about my behavior instead of hers. She held up the old letter. "This was years ago. Yes, things were different then. Ava was already in my home when you wrote it. That isn't what I mean. You understood adoption when you signed that letter. You understood exactly what you were promising." Patricia's jaw tightened. I nodded toward the page in her hand. "You wrote that Ava would be your granddaughter in every sense that mattered. She is. Then why did you tell me biological family is different?" "Because it is." The answer came out faster than she seemed to expect. Nobody spoke. My mother tried to recover. "Different does not mean unloved." I looked at her. "That's the same sentence Brittany keeps using." Brittany finally stepped forward. "Can everyone stop talking about me like I'm not standing here?" Nathan looked at her. "Then answer for yourself." She turned on him. "I've been answering for myself for weeks." "No. You've been explaining why everyone misunderstood you. That's because everyone is twisting one terrible moment into my entire personality." I did not interrupt. By then, I had learned that Brittany often said more when nobody rescued her from silence. She pointed toward me. "She sent private family drama to people evaluating whether I can have a child. I answered a reference you asked me to answer. You knew what you were doing." "Yes," I said. I knew I wasn't going to lie. Brittany laughed sharply. "You keep saying that like you're some kind of witness under oath." "I'm not." "Then stop acting like this is a trial." Nathan's expression changed slightly, but his voice stayed level. "Nobody said it was." Brittany turned toward him. "You're standing there with her. I'm standing here asking you questions. And every answer I give gets used against me." Nathan looked at her for a moment. "Then give me one that doesn't need to be explained afterward." Her face tightened. Patricia stepped between them verbally before the silence could settle. Nathan, this is exactly what Megan wanted. She wanted everyone angry. She wanted this whole process damaged. That's not what happened, he said. You don't know that. I know more than you think. Brittany looked at him. Nathan took out his phone. He did not wave it around or start reading a long list. Yes. Why her? Brittany hesitated. Because she has experience with adoption, and because you told me her family already understood it. Our family. Nathan nodded once. You also told me Ava was never on the final wedding guest list. Brittany's eyes moved toward me. Nathan continued. I saw the RSVP. Her name was there. That was before I changed the list. So you changed it. I was the bride. I was allowed to change my guest list. That isn't what I asked. Brittany looked frustrated. Yes, I changed it. Nathan glanced down at his phone again. And a week before the wedding, you texted Megan to keep Ava nearby for a photo with all the women in the family. Brittany said nothing. That message was yours? Yes. So she was family when you wanted the photograph.
A part written by my mother.
Fair. Nathan's
I would
voice
have to
did
find
not
that one
rise.
myself. The honor
I'm
committee
asking
process
what
began on
changed
March
between
4th.
that message and the wedding.
I drafted a formal
Brittany crossed
request
her
and
arms.
sent it to Marlo.
I wanted one day that
I
felt
asked the
traditional.
committee to
There
compare
it
my
was again.
submitted personal statement from the
softer word placed over
2025
the
cycle with
Nathan
Juliet's
looked
submitted
at her.
personal statement from the
And then after the
2024
wedding, you texted
cycle,
Megan that
specifically the
blood relatives
paragraphs
are
referencing a
Brittany's eyes
pediatric
snapped toward
oncology
me.
patient.
I did not reach for my phone.
I attached my
I did
original
not need
draft
to.
document from spring
Nathan had
2020.
already seen the screenshot weeks earlier. He said, Did you write it? Yes. Did Megan change the words? No. Did she take it out of context? Brittany's voice tightened. The context was that she kept acting like biology shouldn't matter at all. Nathan stared at her. Patricia moved closer to Brittany. This is getting cruel. Nathan looked at my mother. What part? The part where you're interrogating your wife at Christmas. You told Megan biological family was different too. Patricia's eyes flicked toward the paper still in her hand. Nathan pointed to it. But years ago, when Megan was adopting Ava, you wrote the opposite. I did not write the opposite. You wrote that Ava would be your granddaughter in every sense that mattered. She is. Nathan shook his head once. You keep saying that, but every time the word blood enters the room, suddenly there's another category. Patricia opened her mouth, but Brittany cut in. This is ridiculous. I never said I wouldn't love an adopted child. Nobody answered immediately. Then Brittany looked directly at Ava. And now, because of all this, Ava is costing me a child. The room went still. I turned toward Ava, but she was already looking at Brittany. Her voice was calm. I didn't submit anything. Brittany's mouth opened, then closed. Ava continued. I didn't call your agency. I didn't fill out your forms. I didn't ask Mom to put my private stuff in them. You put her name down. Brittany looked away first. That moment mattered to me more than anything I could have said for Ava. She had spent months being spoken about, categorized, apologized around, defended, and minimized. This time she answered for herself. Nathan waited until the silence settled. Then he looked at Brittany. I need you to answer one question. She rubbed one hand over her forehead. Nathan, not here. We've tried not here. Please, I asked you this 2 weeks ago. Patricia said, maybe you two should talk privately. Nathan did not look away from Brittany. No. Because this started with what happened to Ava. And everyone in this room has spent months pretending the issue was Megan's reaction. Brittany's shoulders stiffened. Nathan spoke slowly. If we adopted a daughter, and someday we had a biological daughter, would they both be equally ours? Brittany stared at him. Nobody moved. Nathan waited. And for the second time since he had first asked her, my sister did not answer. Brittany finally looked at Nathan, but she still did not give him the answer he wanted. I would love them both, she said. Completely. But it wouldn't be exactly the same. Nathan's expression did not change. Would they both be equally ours? She looked toward my mother, then back at him. Different doesn't mean less. That's not what I asked. Brittany pressed her lips together. Why are you doing this like there's only one acceptable answer? Because there is one answer I need before I bring a child into our home. You're acting like biology is some dirty word. I'm not. Yes, you are. You're acting like wanting a biological child means I'd mistreat an adopted one. Nathan shook his head. I'm asking whether you would see them as equally your children. I said I'd love them. That isn't the same sentence. Patricia moved closer to Brittany. Nathan, plenty of parents feel a biological connection is different. That doesn't make them bad people. Dad looked at her. No. Plenty of people don't think that way. My mother turned on him. Daniel, you know exactly what I mean. He did not lower his eyes this time. That's the problem. We've all spent years being told we know what you mean. Brittany's face hardened. So now I'm a monster because blood matters to me? No one called you a monster, I said. You didn't have to. I haven't said anything tonight that you didn't already say yourself. She looked at me with a kind of exhausted hatred. You keep pretending you're innocent in all of this. I'm not pretending anything. I answered the form you asked me to answer. You knew what could happen. Yes. Her eyes narrowed. That was the first time I realized how much she had depended on me being ashamed of admitting that. I was not ashamed. I knew telling the truth could create consequences. What I had refused to do was manufacture them. Nathan stepped away from the dining table and took a slow breath. There's something all of you need to understand. Brittany looked at him. What? Harbor Family Services did not reject us. For a second, nobody reacted. Then Patricia said, What? Nathan kept his eyes on Brittany. They asked for additional clarification, that's all. Brittany's expression changed. You told me they were concerned. They were. You said the process was paused. It is. Patricia looked between them. Then what is everyone fighting about? Nathan answered without looking at her. I asked them to pause it. Brittany went completely still. I did too. Until that moment, I had only known what Nathan had told me in pieces. I knew the agency had follow-up questions. I knew he and Brittany were struggling. I did not know he had personally made that call. You did what? Brittany asked. I told them we were not ready to continue right now. You had no right to do that without me. It's a joint process. You could have talked to me. I have been talking to you for weeks. No, you've been interrogating me. I asked whether an adopted child would be equally ours. And I told you I would love that child. Nathan's voice stayed quiet. You still won't say equally. Brittany stared at him. He continued. I am not bringing a child into this marriage, while I'm wondering whether someday, if we had a biological baby, you would look at the first child and quietly decide one of them was more yours. I would never do that. You already did it to Ava. The words landed harder than anything said so far. Brittany looked at him as if he had slapped her. That's completely different. Nathan nodded once, slowly. That's exactly what scares me. Patricia stepped in. You are making a permanent decision based on one wedding. No, Nathan said. I'm making a temporary decision based on what I learned after it. Brittany's voice cracked with anger. Temporary? I asked the agency to pause. I didn't withdraw forever. But we are not moving forward while we can't even agree on what family means. She stared at him. So Megan wins. Nathan looked genuinely confused. This is not a competition. Brittany pointed at me. She wanted this. I shook my head. No. You wanted me exposed. I wanted Ava treated like family. And now my adoption is paused and my husband thinks I'm some kind of liar. You lied to him about why we left the wedding. Her face tightened. Nathan said, that part matters too. Brittany looked at him. I was trying to keep one stupid family fight from becoming bigger. You told me Ava wasn't on the guest list. She wasn't on the final one. You knew what I meant. There it was again. I saw Dad react to the phrase too. Nathan closed his eyes briefly. I'm done being told I know what everyone means when the words say something else. Brittany crossed her arms. So what now? He was quiet long enough that my mother finally sat down. Then Nathan said, I'm staying somewhere else for a while. Brittany's face emptied. What? I've already packed what I need. She glanced toward the front windows. You came here planning to leave me? I came here knowing I might. You put your things in the car before Christmas dinner? Yes. Patricia stood again. Nathan, this is insane. Everyone is emotional. That's why I've spent the last few weeks thinking about it. He looked at Brittany. I'm not filing for divorce tomorrow. I'm not making a legal decision tonight. I'm saying I need space, and I think we need counseling before I can decide whether this marriage is still what I thought it was. That was important. He was not storming out because of one sentence. He had checked the RSVP, the text messages, Dad's account, Brittany's story, and his own conversations with her. Christmas was not the beginning of his decision. It was the moment he stopped pretending he had not made one. Brittany looked at me. "Are you happy now?" I could hear how badly she wanted me to say yes. "No. Don't, Lee. I'm not happy your marriage is falling apart. You expect me to believe that? I expected you to treat my daughter like family." She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "You always have an answer." "No, I just stopped giving you the one you wanted." My mother turned toward me then, all the fear in her face finally becoming anger. "You broke this family." I looked at her. For years, that sentence would have worked. I would have started explaining, defending, proving that I was still loyal enough to belong. But standing there beside Ava, I finally understood that my mother's version of family had always depended on somebody absorbing the damage quietly. "No," I said. I stopped standing in the crack and pretending I was holding it together. Patricia stared at me, then she turned toward Ava. "You know Grandma loves you." Ava did not answer immediately. My mother stepped closer. "You do know that, don't you?" Ava's voice was calm. "You keep telling me you love me. You just don't choose me when choosing me costs you something." Patricia looked as though she wanted to argue, but for once there was nowhere for the argument to go. Ava touched the silver ring on her right hand. "Our signal." I picked up our coats. Dad followed us to the front door. "I'll call you separately," he said. "If that's okay." I looked at Ava. She gave a small nod. "That's okay," I said. We drove away before dinner was served. For the first several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Ava leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. "Can we be done now?" I knew what she meant. Done explaining, done proving, done waiting for someone to use the correct word while holding the same belief. "Yes," I said, "we can be done." 3 days later, Brittany left me a voicemail. It was the first message she had sent since the wedding that did not blame Ava. But it still proved she had not understood what had actually cost her everything. 3 days after Christmas, Brittany left me a voicemail that lasted almost 4 minutes. I listened to it once while standing in my kitchen, then again later with the volume low after Ava went upstairs. Brittany did not mention the agency first. She did not mention Nathan first either. She said she could not believe her entire life was being judged by one terrible night, and that she had spent years being a good sister, a good daughter, and a good wife before everyone decided one sentence defined her. It was progress in the smallest possible sense. Because, for the first time, she did not blame Ava, but she still believed the problem was the size of the consequence, rather than the belief that had created it. I did not call her back. A year earlier, I would have thought silence was cowardly. By then, I had learned that refusing to continue an argument after everything important had already been said was not avoidance. Brittany knew what happened at the wedding. She knew what she wrote afterward. She knew what she told Nathan. She also knew she had been unable to answer his question even after weeks of being given the chance. There was nothing useful I could add to a 4-minute voicemail except another round of explanations she was not ready to hear. Nathan moved into a furnished apartment on the other side of Columbus that week. I did not know the details immediately, and I did not ask. Most of what I learned came later from Nathan himself, from Dad, or through information Brittany eventually chose to share openly. Nathan and Brittany started counseling in January. Harbor Family Services kept their joint adoption process paused because the two applicants were no longer moving forward together. There was no dramatic rejection letter, no permanent ban, no caseworker declaring Brittany unfit. Nathan had simply said he was not willing to continue until he trusted the marriage enough to bring a child into it, and that trust did not come back. For the first couple of months, Patricia tried to treat Nathan's separation like a temporary emergency she could manage. She called Dad's phone more often because I had stopped answering hers unless the message involved something practical. She suggested family dinners, neutral restaurants, even one weekend brunch, where she wanted everyone to sit down like adults. Dad refused to carry those invitations for her. When she wanted to ask me something, he told her to ask me herself. When she complained that I was refusing to heal the family, he told her he was no longer going to translate my boundaries into something easier for her to accept. That was the first lasting change I saw in him. Dad started calling Ava directly when he wanted to see her instead of asking me to arrange everything. He took her to lunch after one of her college campus visits. He came to our house to help replace a loose railing on the back steps and stayed for dinner without turning the evening into a conversation about Patricia. He never demanded credit for any of it. He had finally understood that an apology mattered only if it changed what he did the next time pressure arrived. My mother noticed the difference quickly. For years, nearly every holiday, birthday, dinner, and family gathering had happened at her house because everyone assumed that was where family happened. That assumption began to disappear. Denise invited people to a summer cookout at her place instead. Dad attended Ava's graduation dinner with us.
At the time, it had seemed like a small favor.
Use
One
the
of
family
many.
Apple ID.
He clicked
The
cancel.
old one Aunt Marianne
The page
set up
processed
in
for a moment
20,000.
before
And remember
confirming the
password.
refund,
Cassandra replied within 10
$3,800
seconds.
deposited back to his
Already on
account within 5
That
to 7
family
business
Apple
days.
ID had been
He
on
moved
Aunt
on to
Marianne's
his banking
phone
app,
before she died.
found the transfer
It had
record
been
from
on
3 weeks
Walter's.
prior,
It had been on
$6,500 wired
It
to
had been on
Marilyn's
mine.
account,
And once people
marked
stopped
My
as
mother had never
wedding
used
gift
it because
honeymoon
my mother
support.
believed iCloud
He
was a
reversed
place
it.
I
for
wish I could say I handled the aftermath perfectly. I did not. For a while, I still found myself checking every family interaction for signs of another problem before one had even appeared. I would ask Ava too many questions after she spoke to Dad or saw a cousin. I would catch myself wondering whether I needed screenshots of something that had not become a conflict. One evening, after I asked her for the third time whether Patricia had tried to contact her directly, Ava closed her laptop and looked at me with a tired expression I recognized immediately. "Mom, I'll tell you if something happens." "I know." "Do you?" That made me sit down. I told her the truth. "I think I got so used to watching for where they might hurt you that I forgot you're allowed to just live your life without me inspecting everything afterward." Ava gave me a small smile. That would be nice. There was another thing I needed to say, something harder, because I could not fix it with a boundary or a document. I told her I was sorry I had spent so many years treating each incident like an isolated logistics problem. When Patricia used the wrong phrase, I corrected the phrase. When Brittany forgot her from a picture, I fixed the picture. When someone made Ava feel peripheral, I changed the seating, left early, or changed the plan. I had protected her from individual moments, but I had been slower to believe that those moments were all pointing toward the same underlying belief. Ava listened without interrupting. "I always knew you'd protect me," she said. "That wasn't the problem." "What was?" "Sometimes I wanted you to believe me when I said something felt different before I could prove why. That hurt because she was right. I should have. You do now. It was not forgiveness wrapped in a bow. It was better than that. It was information I could actually use." Brittany and Nathan remained separated through the spring. They continued counseling for a while, but by early summer Nathan told Dad, and later told me directly, that he had decided not to resume the marriage. The legal divorce process began after that, months after Christmas, not the next morning and not as some theatrical punishment. I stayed out of the details. Their finances, property, and legal decisions belonged to them. The only part relevant to me was that the adoption process never restarted because the marriage that had entered it no longer existed in the same form. Brittany did something in late summer that surprised me. She wrote Ava a letter. Not me, Ava. The envelope arrived at our house with Ava's name on the front in Brittany's handwriting. I put it on the counter and did not open it. I did not ask Ava whether she planned to read it. That choice belonged to her. She opened it that night. I was washing dishes when she came into the kitchen holding the folded pages. She actually apologized. I dried my hands. "Do you want to talk about it?" "A little." Brittany did not blame Patricia. She did not mention fertility treatments as an excuse. She did not say she had been stressed or misunderstood. Ava showed me only one sentence, because it was the part she wanted me to see. What I said was true to what I believed that day. "That is the part I have to change." I read it and handed the letter back. "That's better than what she said before." "Yeah. Do you want to answer?" Ava folded the pages carefully. "Not yet." "Then don't." She looked relieved that I had not said maybe Brittany deserved a response for trying. That was another lesson I had learned. An apology can be sincere and still arrive before the person who was hurt is ready to receive it. Brittany, taking responsibility, did not create a deadline for Ava's forgiveness. By the time the next Christmas came around, almost a full year had passed since the envelope under Patricia's tree. Ava was 18 and finishing her first semester of college, close enough to come home for winter break. Dad asked if we wanted to have dinner together a few days before Christmas, and we did. It was small. The three of us. Too much food. Ava complaining about dorm laundry. Dad pretending he understood one of her classes until she started asking him questions about it. Patricia held her own Christmas dinner. I knew who attended because the invitations and family conversations were no longer secret, not because I was monitoring her. The table was smaller. Denise went for dessert but spent the main meal with her own children. Dad did not go. Brittany stopped by briefly. A few relatives who once would have rearranged their entire holiday around Patricia had
During
made
their
other
courtship,
plans.
you watched
I
her
did
die
not
from a
sit
paragraph your mother handed you.
Loneliness
That
was not the
before
first
they
thing I
married in
wanted for my mother.
1958. That is
I
a
had
decision
never
you
wanted
made
to settle for
over
months.
engagement ring
What
she
she said
bought
was
her
that
in
nobody
Charleston. You don't
was
have to do
willing
this
to
tomorrow.
prove
There
her
was the Purple
importance,
Heart
but I
he had
said
earned
whatever
outside
definition
the
of
city in
family she
1968.
For
And
years,
she never spoken of
Patricia had
once.
believed a
I
full
saved the
table
call with my family Bible from 1911-18. My mother left
I
great
eventually
voicemails.
understood that a
Grandparents
table
written
4
in a
minutes
copper plate
and
12
12
seconds. Elizabeth, there was a recipe book
Listen
she
to
had been
me.
keeping
Habit.
since she got
If
married.
you do
this tomorrow.
Fear of disappointing someone can fill chairs. None of those things create belonging. I am telling this now in January, more than a year after Brittany's wedding, and the part that stays with me is not Nathan leaving or Patricia opening that envelope. It is how little I actually had to do once I stopped protecting everyone from the truth. I did not ruin an adoption. I answered a question. I did not end a marriage. Nathan learned what his wife believed and made his own decision. I did not remove my mother from the center of the family. People simply stopped allowing her to decide where the center was. I used to think revenge meant taking something from the person who hurt you. Now I think sometimes the most devastating thing you can do is stop supplying the silence that allowed them to keep everything. Ava came home from college yesterday afternoon while I was still working. I heard the front door unlock, then her backpack hit the bench in the hallway before she called out that she was starving. She still has the key I gave her years ago. She does not ring the bell, wait on the porch, or ask whether she belongs before she walks inside. She never has to. You should never ask a child to accept disrespect just to keep relatives comfortable. When someone repeatedly treats your child as less important, believe the pattern, set clear boundaries, and stop covering for behavior that harms them. Protecting family does not mean protecting lies. You can tell the truth calmly. Document what matters, and let people face the consequences of their own choices. Real love shows up when standing beside someone costs you something. If this story reminded you to choose dignity over appearances and honesty over forced peace, subscribe to the channel for more family stories with hard-earned lessons.